As we look ahead towards hurricane season, you might be curious, how does a warming Earth increase the impacts from hurricanes? Now, I talked to a climate expert, Shel Winkley, about that exact question.
Right, so we know that with climate change, we're warming the atmosphere, but also that carbon pollution that we're putting into the atmosphere as humans sinks into the ocean. The ocean holds most of the Earth's heat as well as the carbon pollution we put into it. So we know that if we have an influence on the sea surface temperatures, how hot those ocean waters are, especially above what they would have been without a world of extra carbon pollution, we know how hurricanes get going, how they get their juice essentially to intensify. And that comes from those hot ocean temperatures. So what we can do with the Climate Shift Index is use that knowledge and understand how much more likely an unusually warm temperature that fed a hurricane is because of climate change. And that helps us understand, as that intensity increases, what took a natural disaster and turned it into a somewhat unnatural disaster.
Shel emphasized in our discussion that climate change is not creating more hurricanes.
Yeah, so a hurricane's going to happen. That's the weather aspect of it. We're not saying that climate change made this hurricane, but what we can do with this science, this peer-reviewed and data-backed science, is that we can say, okay, we know that this hurricane probably would have been a Category 3, but because of the extra warming that the ocean had, that unusual warmth, it boosted it by this many miles per hour. And so what we can do to use with that is understand that we as humans have boosted that intensity. And what that turns into real life is maybe added storm surge, but specifically with the wind, added wind damage as well. So even just a half category boost can double the damage that we can see on our coastlines or where that hurricane goes.
Now, this is a question I get quite often, is you're talking about climate change, you're talking about that intensity of a storm that could have been this strong and then as strong. What's your baseline going back to, when what is the used to be this, I guess, is my question. And how do you know that data if you're going back more than 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, if you use an ice cores or something like that? Just if you want to get into that.
Yeah, so what we do is the way we work the Climate Shift Index, it's a ratio. So essentially we're running a set of climate models, and what we're doing is we have a very good baseline understanding of how much added greenhouse gases humans have put into the atmosphere, that carbon pollution. We do that through ice cores, we do it through having the reporting station on top of Mauna Loa, things like that, right? So we have a very good understanding of how that carbon pollution has exponentially grown as humans have continued to evolve. So the way we do the Climate Shift Index is we take these climate models and we run them 13 times over. And we do it with the historical emissions that we have put into the atmosphere. And then we run them pre-industrial revolution, and we run it again. And what we can get out of that is a ratio. And if we see that positive signal for the ocean, anywhere from 0 to 1,000 times more likely, that's going to tell us how much of an impact we have on unusually warm temperatures. So we're doing it in both scenarios, the current world and what the world would have been had we not started burning coal, oil, and natural gas, and we can get that understanding. And again, it's not saying that that hurricane wouldn't have been there. It's not saying that the temperatures wouldn't have been unusually warm, because that's the natural variation of the Earth. But what we're understanding is the likelihood that we've increased it, as well as the frequency. How much more likely in the future, at a certain time of the year, in the water, is that temperature going to be unusual?
Now, to kind of carry off of that, in your presentation, you're talking about certain areas. Some people kind of understand that climate change is real, et cetera. And a lot of people are, they're real life learners. They go through it. Can you touch on that? And then also extrapolate, how do we communicate to those people that may have not been hit by a natural disaster recently?
Yeah, so the way that people experience climate change, the way that you and I experience climate change, is through extreme weather. A lot of times that's an extreme event that you've lived through, or it's just something you've seen on the news or scrolling on your phone. That's how we see climate change. So a lot of, when we're looking at the links between extreme weather and climate change itself, for hurricanes specifically, the places that we know that Americans understand that there's a connection, it's the communities and the states that are along the coast that get impacted by hurricanes. So when we did a big survey of the country, and you look at the middle part of the country, the plains, it's a lower connection because you're not directly impacted to that. But then if you look at something like flooding, or if you look at extreme heat, because that's one of the things that climate change is going to impact us all with, where you see the impacts of that, you see the connection to climate change. And the reason is, and the great thing about attribution science, it answers the why. When you walk outside and you think, today's April and it feels really hot for April, we can use attribution science to say, yeah, it is. This doesn't mean that every day on that April day will be that hot, but it tells us how much more likely in this warming world a hot temperature in April could be.
Nice. And trying to give on the topic of visualization and trying to tell people, tell me about the Flood Vision program, because I think that's a fascinating program. I talked to somebody when they came out to Jacksonville and they were actually filming it and everything. Can you just elaborate on it and why you have that program in place?
Yeah, so sea level rise is something that our communities, our coastal communities, are having to deal with. So what we did is we took a Ford Lightning and we were able to map the entire East Coast as well as Gulf Coast. Think of it like a Google Maps car with LiDAR. So we're able to get the pictures, get the videos, but then also understand the elevation changes. So that's helpful. So then we can go back and we can take the what we know about emissions and what we expect with sea level rise at different emission rates in different years. And we can actually generate images. So how that's helpful, one, just to understand how sea level rise is going to impact our communities, but two, let's say there's a hurricane coming and we know that storm surge is going to be forecast between this and this. That's really hard to understand if you've never experienced storm surge. But if we can put that into a visual and you can see it and you can see the business that you know or even your home and you can see where the water has the potential to rise to, I think that helps people make understanding or make really just decisions to keep themselves and their families safe when tropical weather especially is coming our way.
And okay, so if anybody wants to learn more about climate change with Climate Central, where should they go? And if you have anything else, maybe I've not asked that you really think, you know what, I want to drive this message home. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, so the thing that we do at Climate Central is we put together the science and the data and then we give it to communities because you can tell the stories around that changing weather pattern. ClimateCentral.org has all of our resources, all of our science if you want to know more, especially about the Climate Shift Index. And if you want to see our Climate Shift Index tools and our attribution science, it's right there at ClimateCentral.org as well, and of course on social media at Climate Central.
And with stronger and more rapidly intensifying storms, the impacts are just that much greater. So our goal here at First Coast News is to relay those impacts throughout tropical season. To find more on our discussion with Shel Winkley, check out our website and on FCN Plus. I'm meteorologist Robert Speta.